Hey everyone, welcome to the Dill Pickle Movie Network. I am Dylan Randazzo, and today I will be your tour guide of sorts through all the movies that I saw at the Sundance Film Festival 2025. One of my favorite festivals, period, but especially for this channel. I mean, my first review I ever did on this channel when I was a wee little babe was the Judas and the Black Messiah review from 2021. And every single year I've been, attending this Festival. I've been attending it virtually, but that's one of the gifts that Sundance gives is this opportunity to watch things virtually, so you don't have to book the plane ticket and go to the hotels and freeze in the cold and watch these movies. But it is also a beautiful venue, and if you do have the pleasure and the honor of going, it is a great festival. It's also just full of so many excited fans, not just of cinema but of these like really small indie darlings. That's one thing that Sundance really props up, is these independent filmmakers, these filmmakers who are getting their starts. I would say a majority of the things I saw at Sundance were first features. This is such an exciting time for them as well as filmmakers, to put their trust in a festival to get their films out there. It's a very daunting thing. As someone who just started my first feature, that is being distributed right now, in the means of being distributed soon, like, it is very daunting to put yourself out there like that. And the Sundance audiences are so welcoming and so inviting, and really just welcome these filmmakers with open arms. Not all the movies are great, but it is just a celebration of film in a really interesting way. These are also movies that no one else has seen. It's very beginning of the year, so they don't have these prejudged biases around them. Like, when I go to New York Film Festival, a lot of the times those movies have already screened at Cannes Film Festival or Venice or TIFF or Telluride, and you kind of already have that inkling of how that movie is going to be, at least how other audiences received it. Here at Sundance, everything kind of has a blank, fresh slate. It's really, really nice. And as a film fan, I just love to absorb it with other friends, with other moviegoers and critics that I follow, and just getting to see everyone kind of just embrace this new cinema and kind of issue in a fresh new year of movies, because we are also in the midst of award season, and sometimes it can get a little overbearing hearing the same titles over and over again. Like, how many times do I want to hear about Amelia Perez and The Brutalist and Honora? Like, sometimes I need a little break from those, and you can seek solace in the Sundance Film Festival as this kind of fresh new morning cup of coffee to help jolt yourself awake and say, hey, a new year is among us, and this is what we have to offer. And I think that's what's so exciting about Sundance. Now, I wanted to, before I get to my best of the fest, because that is coming, I'm going to tell you about all 17 titles I watched this year. 17 titles. Yeah, I splurged. But you know what? I wanted to really just seize the opportunity, seize the moment, and really make the most of this year at Sundance. But one film that I actually didn't get to see was the film Twinless. And the reason for not seeing that is not because I forgot to get a pass, or I didn't get a pass, or I didn't want to see it, or anything like that. This one won the Audience Award for Best Film. Like, this was the number one US dramatic film chosen by the audiences. So I definitely wanted to see it. Dylan O'Brien won a prize for his acting. But that film, one morning, I opened up the app, because when you get the Sundance Virtual Pass, you see all the films displayed for you in the app. You get to see all of them kind of on your homepage. And then you have a tab with your movies that you paid for, got tickets for, got passes for. But most of them are on that homepage if you want to buy more passes, for example. And one day, Twinless was gone. And I thought maybe it was a glitch, maybe it was some error. But then I read a report that apparently Twinless was taken down from the site because of piracy. And this is something that I've heard a lot of people say, shame on Sundance. It's such an expensive film festival as is. One person pirates it and it soils the bunch for the rest of us. But I think that's the wrong mentality to have, because yes, Sundance can get expensive for you if you're not, fortunate enough, to be a critic and get the passes, or be gifted screeners throughout the year. Like, it is a big, monetary investment. But at the same time, when you're paying for something, you're paying for the exclusivity of something. You are also keeping in mind that this is a filmmaker's work that you are dealing with now in your hands. And if you break that trust, if you breach that kind of agreement, that unspoken agreement with the festival, especially, it's not even unspoken. I mean, it's right there before every single screening. It says this is being tracked for piracy. There is an email address. Your email address is on the screen when you're watching the movie in occasional spots because of piracy. Yeah, some people want to kind of bend the rules. Some people want to try to skirt around it and walk on eggshells and try their best to find a way to get these scenes online. And the scenes themselves, it's about an actor, doing something vulnerable. It was a sex scene. And that's another thing to have, to keep in mind, is the fact that, this is an actor putting himself in his vulnerability on the line. It is a filmmaker who is, trying to get their film seen and distributed and profit and make money off their movie. Yet when someone takes just a few scenes and shares them with the world, that's kind of going against the whole point of Sundance, which is to prop up these new filmmakers, get them distribution so that people can pay to see them, so that they can profit, and then they can make more movies and get more blank checks to make bigger projects. And when you just take everything and put it online for people to see, now there are people who probably won't go see Twinless because, oh, I saw some clips online. It doesn't seem for me. Or I saw all I wanted to see because all I wanted to see was Dylan O'Brien, all this stuff. And it's like, I hate that mentality that all of a sudden the fingers point at Sundance, like they're to blame, because they reasonably so said, okay, if people are going to be taking videos of this, then we're just going to take it down, because that is disrespectful to the filmmakers. That's disrespectful for the festival as well, who's curated this very specific group of films. And now it just kind of sucks the excitement out of this. And honestly, I would not be surprised, and I almost encourage them to stop the virtual Sundance altogether, because it makes a statement and it tells everyone that you shouldn't do this. This is not right. And I'm not talking about a movie that's been out for 20 or 30 years that, like, okay, I don't want to pay to watch Braveheart for a 10th time, so instead I'm just going to find a streaming link somewhere else. I don't necessarily advocate for it, but also there are people who can't afford to watch movies and pay for movies, and maybe they're not on Netflix, or maybe they don't have the means to buy a Prime account, or even, sit through Freevee ads. Like, for whatever reason, I know people pirate movies, and you know what? I don't personally like that. I personally wouldn't do so, but you know what? It's not a 20-year-old movie. It's a movie that hasn't even come out yet, and you're already spoiling it for everyone else. And yes, this may not have been a scene that spoiled any huge plot twists or big, plot narrative reveals or anything, but it's just the principle of it. And you know what? I don't blame Sundance for it. I think they did the right thing in taking it down. And now I think for years and years and years, we've been hearing people say, well, Sundance doesn't put everything online. Like, they should make everything available for everyone. And I'm like, this is why. Because you put up only 10 films and someone pirates one, and then it's all ruined. Like, yes, I would love to have every single film available to me, but the more films you put on the platform, the more risk you have of idiots like this putting them out for everyone to see, just because they want to be the first person to get all the clicks because you were the first person to put Dylan O'Brien's nude sex scene online. Good for you. I don't know. It bothers me so much, because this is something that is the draw, that is the appeal for Sundance, is the fact that I can see it from the comfort of my home. I don't have the means to travel there every single year to see it, and this was going to be a great year to really just be able to put all my financial means into the films themselves and not necessarily pay for lodging and plane tickets. And for a lot of people, that's the case. Some people only get to see one or two Sundance Film Festivals movies every year. But now, because one person decided, you know what, I'm going to ruin it for everyone else, I wouldn't be surprised if virtual Sundance doesn't remain. And you know what? I stand by that decision. I think Sundance should do whatever they feel is right to keep their integrity intact, to keep their films intact, and to keep the filmmakers' trust intact too. Because if you're just making a precedent that, like, okay, well, yeah, one person pirated it, but we can leave it up for everyone to see. It's fine. And then 10 more people pirate it. I mean, that's distrust with the filmmakers. And the filmmakers are like, you know what? I don't want to do any more festivals. Because you know what the worst case scenario of this is? That, yes, they keep the virtual Sundance online, but no filmmakers want to submit their films to Sundance now because they don't want their films pirated. So instead, you're going to get a bunch of slop, because filmmakers are going to be like, I guess I don't care if it gets pirated. I'll throw this at you. And then the really, really great films, they're like, I don't necessarily want to submit them to Sundance anymore because I'm worried they're going to get pirated. I'm worried people are just going to film them and put them out there. And I just think that's just a really, really unfortunate thing. So I know I took 10 minutes of this review already to talk about that, but it's something I needed to address, because it's something that I think has had some really surprising responses out there. Just people being so quick to blame Sundance for doing so, when all they were doing was taking a course of action to prevent more things from being pirated. I'm surprised. Honestly, I think there could have been a world where Sundance just closed virtual altogether that minute there, and said, you know what, everyone, you're getting refunds, you're getting vouchers for other things. Like, we can't risk this happening again, because it is a serious issue, especially for a film that hasn't even seen distribution yet. I really think, Sundance, why we go is to prop up these up and coming filmmakers and to show our support, yes, monetarily, but also just our support, our hearts and our eyes and our ears and our minds, And when you're just merely using your platform to get clicks on a Twitter post, like, I don't know. I just think some people are in it for the wrong reasons. I watch Sundance films because they make me feel good, because I am an avid lover of cinema, not because I want to post a scene from Omaha to spoil the movie so people click and like my post and I am famous for 10 minutes and then it all goes away. Like, I just think that's the wrong method to have. And I think I encourage a lot of people, especially for these festivals, they're giving you a gift by letting you see it early virtually. Don't F it up for everyone else. That is my rant. I'm sorry. Let's get into these movies. I saw 17 things at Sundance and I'm exhausted. You can tell in my voice. You can tell because I'm a little frustrated with the Twinless situation. But yeah, it was a great Sundance. There were so many great films. Some duds. Like I said, there's not always going to be glowing marks for every single film here, but this was a really solid Sundance Film Festival. There was a lot of variety. I mean, I think of something like Bubble and Squeak that I saw, which is this really eccentric, kind of quirky, light comedy in the stylings of something like Taika Waititi, like Wes Anderson, about these cabbage smugglers. Not necessarily my favorite film of the fest, but still really fun. Then you have something that's a total polar opposite, which is like Love Brooklyn, which is this really authentic New York story with André Holland. It's a love triangle, and these very familiar, down to earth, slice of life situations and characters. You really do get the polar opposites at Sundance, and that's what I love. You have these really big genre swings, and then these really sincere, more slice of life, more raw, lived in, dramatic pieces. And I think that's what makes Sundance so special. Those were two films that weren't really on my bottom five, not really in my top five, not really in my honorable mentions, but just floating out there somewhere. But I do want to get into some honorable mentions. But before I do, I'm going to start with the slop. I'm going to start with the stuff that I didn't love, just because, you know what, I did see so much stuff that I was able to make a bottom five, but I don't want to by any means degrade these filmmakers, because as I said, this is a platform to prop those filmmakers up. And you know what, even though I didn't gel with all these films, I see things in every little single one of them that I think could really show that this filmmaker or this team or some of these actors have a long career ahead of them. But alas, here are some films that just did not gel with me, starting with Didn't Die. I actually like the idea of this a lot. This is a Mira Minon directed film. She is one of the directors of some episodes of Miss Marvel, so I was definitely familiar with her work. She tells a story about this podcast host in the midst of this zombie apocalypse, and as someone who started my channel and my podcasts out of the pandemic, it was a year into the pandemic, but I was still coming out of the pandemic, didn't really know where I wanted to funnel my creativity. I definitely related to this film because it's about a podcast host. She's trying to figure out how to use her voice and create art in the midst of this really disastrous kind of surrounding. And I thought it was very interesting. The only problem is that I think it's a little slowly paced to where I think it could lose some interest throughout. I never really waned interest, but I do know a few people just talking to throughout the festival didn't fully stay in it the entire way through. And then I do think the zombie action itself is the weakest part of it. I think the actual way it's shot is very shoddy. It's very all over the place, but it could be because of the low budget. They wanted to try to mask all the cracks and crevices as best as they could. So by making it a little shakier, a little cuttier, a little zippier, some of the action, they were able to disguise some of the low budgetness of it. But I think the movie's at its strongest when it is focused on that kind of moral dilemma of like trying to preserve your own self and sanity, but also wanting to create art to help others get through this really tough time. And I really resonated with that. But as for this festival, it just wasn't necessarily one of the top choices at Sundance, not necessarily one of my favorites. Another film that I thought was okay, but not great was Bunnylovr, directed by Katarina Zhu. This is a film that, again, like has a really good idea and really great themes at its core. It deals a lot with, online relationships and, the kind of masks we put on for others, and when we let people into our lives and privacy on the internet, but it also humanizes sex work in a really interesting way. The only problem is that like all these themes I feel like have been seen in other films and better films. Like I think about Red Rooms, which just came out last year on Shudder. That's a film that really deals with internet safety in a really interesting way, and the weird kind of dark web holes of the internet in that way. Jane Schoenbrun's We're All Going to the World's Fair kind of delves into some of those things, and then something like Anora talking about like sex work in a positive light. So I feel like Bunnylovr just hit on a lot of themes that we've seen in a lot of other films. But alas, it is still well written. It has good themes nonetheless. I mean, Rachel Sennett is one of the co-writers. She also stars in the film. So it was pretty good. It's just, again, not one of my favorites, especially amongst so many great films. Ricky, directed by Rashad Fret, is about this recently released guy. He's about 30 years old. His name's Ricky. He's trying to navigate his life post-prison. He gets out of prison. And it's really just about the, post-prison experience, navigating as a man in this world, navigating family. Again, it's another film that I feel like you've seen before. It's a film that kind of retreads a lot of certain themes, and it also feels like it's trying to bite off the entirety of what this experience is without kind of finding its little focuses throughout. I feel like it was a little unfocused, trying to bite off so many different things that it just ended up becoming generic because of that. I would have liked for them to pick one or two lanes and really stick to them, and instead they pick like six or seven lanes. And because they're not really going for it in every single area, it just ends up becoming a little bit, I don't want to say the word, but a little bit basic, a little bit rote, a little bit familiar to other films just like it. Another one that I was very disappointed with, which actually won the jury prize for the best U.S. dramatic prize, it was Atropia, which is directed by Haley Gates. It's actually produced by Luca Guadagnino. This was one of the films that kind of sold out immediately. Everyone was really excited about Atropia, and it has a really interesting premise. This is about this role-playing facility for military soldiers as they prepare for training. It's basically this fake town. It's almost like Truman Show-esque. This fake town where all these people have all these different roles to play, and they are actors playing these townspeople, and the war soldiers come through, and it's basically part of their training to like kind of train in this town as if they were actually in the places they were going to fight for in the war. These are actual things that happen around the world, but this is a dramatized, a fictionalized version of that type of facility. And it focuses on one of the women who plays one of the townspeople in her acting career, and she's at a crossroads, and she actually falls in love with one of the soldiers. And I thought this was just a really interesting idea. The only problem is that it just becomes a full-fledged romance. I think a lot of the fun satire play that's seen in like the first 5 or 10 minutes is kind of gone rather quickly. I've seen some people out there say it should have been a short film because it just goes on way too long with the same thing. It should have been this kind of short, sweet, quaint little thing. I've also heard people say this should have been a full series, and I think there's a really cool angle to that where maybe you make it a few different characters' perspectives in this kind of overall fake role-playing town, and not just focus it on this one relationship, but maybe you have like two or three characters be the focus, and every episode is a little bit of their stories. I think that would have also worked. The problem is they find one very specific thing, and that's this relationship, and they make it all about that, to where I think you lose a lot of the excitement about the premise itself, the idea that there are these role-playing towns and this military thing and all the satire with the war. I love a good war satire, but I don't know, I felt like this one went on a little bit too long. It almost feels a little aimless, a little meandering. So Atropia, not one of my favorites, but by far the biggest clunker of the festival, but I almost say it with a cheeky little smile on my face, is By Design, which is directed by Amanda Kramer. This is a film that has probably the most insane logline of any film I've ever seen at Sundance Film Festival. It's the most Sundancey logline ever. The logline reads like this: a woman swaps bodies with a chair, and everyone likes her better as a chair. That is the real premise of the movie. And the funny thing is, like, it's not just an inciting incident. That is the movie. The entire 91 minutes is that premise. A woman swaps bodies with a chair. And I think it's a really clever idea that can maybe fill like a 5-minute SNL sketch, maybe like 4 or 3 minutes. It could have also been like a really cool like Lynchian short film as well, if like David Lynch took a shot at this material, rest in peace. But unfortunately, it's 91 minutes, and it was just kind of the same thing over and over again. It was very grating. It was a very big chore to sit through. And I think there are a lot of people who are going to find it just their right weird cup of tea. But for me, I don't know. I just didn't vibe with it. I wish I liked it more because the premise is so funny. But this almost feels like a movie that someone parodying the kind of offbeat genre Sundance film would make. Like, you see this really ridiculous premise, you make a really stupid, ridiculous movie, but it's also kind of like the slow burn art house piece as well. I really, really wanted to like it because I think there are really promising elements. Like, obviously, Melanie Griffith's narration's really good. I think Juliette Lewis had the potential with the performance, but I don't know. It's a joke that goes on for maybe 3 minutes, and then the joke is old, and then it's another 87 minutes. I just didn't really vibe with that one. But enough of the bad, okay? That's the stuff I didn't vibe with. But let's talk about some that I really liked. I thought there were some really good international offerings this year. The Things You Kill was a really interesting one. I brought up David Lynch already, but this one has gotten some really direct comparisons to David Lynch's stuff. I wouldn't necessarily go that far. I think you're getting your hopes up a little too high if you're thinking about David Lynch or Coen Brothers, these other names that come up. Oscar Farhadi is another name that has come up a lot. This is directed by Ali Reza Khatami. This is a story about a guy whose mother dies, and he basically goes on this revenge tour with his gardener to try to seek revenge on his mother's death because he thinks he knows what the real reasoning behind her death is. And you know what? For a lot of this, it's like a kind of slow burn, really tense thriller, and then it kind of takes a really interesting pivot into something a little bit more abstract. And I really liked it. It's just one of those things that I think with a few more viewings, I'll actually be able to wrap my full head around everything that's going on because it is a lot. But ultimately, I thought it was pretty solid. It's one of the best photographed films of the festival for sure. And then another one, the version of the Quarry Lake. This is directed by Laura Kasabe. This is kind of like a Call Me by Your Name type Luca Guadagnino hangout romance love triangle about these young teens, and some of them want to get with this guy, and some of them are virgins, some of them are not, and there's all these really interesting hangouts on this like lakeside. But then you start to realize that there's something a little bit more supernatural going on as well, pertaining to one of the characters and her relationships with another family member, and you start to see how this kind of becomes more of an insidious kind of twisted romance, more than just an innocent little coming of age film. So I thought this was really fun. If you're a horror fan, I think you're definitely going to like this one as well. But again, some pacing issues here and there, and ultimately I had seen a few other films that it did remind me of that were slightly better, but ultimately very, very solid. Another one that like was just outside my top 5 is a movie called Mad Bills to Pay, or Destiny, Dile que no soy malo. This is directed by Joel Alfonso Vargas. This is a really, really interesting film about a guy who is admittedly a bit of a loser. He doesn't really have his life figured out, and then he gets this one girl, Destiny, pregnant, and she comes to live with his family, and it really just kind of navigates this really interesting kind of point in life where you think you've got it all figured out, you think you're mature, you don't want anyone else's advice, but you very clearly evidently don't, and especially thrusting someone who is essentially still a bit of a man-child into this very serious thing as a young pregnancy, especially considering the girl he gets pregnant is significantly younger than him. She's still a high schooler. He is, I think, 19 or 20. It's a very, very interesting film. It's one of those films where you don't really like the main character, you don't really enjoy his presence, you don't really find a lot of similarities, yet you can still empathize with him. And I think that's what's so solid about this film, is that because of the writing, because of the performances, it's so authentic. At times, I thought I was watching a documentary, but it was really just these actors kind of just improving and living in the space. And one of the reasons why it is so empathetic and why it feels so raw and vulnerable and relatable in a way, even though the main character is hard to relate to, is because the camera does not move. There's one move of the camera in the entire film, and the director said it was a complete accident. So it's one of those films where the camera stays stagnant the entire time, which some might say, this feels like a play. But I think because it's also soaking up these really rich kind of places throughout Queens and New York and all these really interesting settings, and because of the way the camera is angled in such a very specific space, it really feels honestly uncomfortably voyeuristic. The way you're able to kind of watch what's going on in real time in these people's lives. It's not just a slice of life. It's kind of like a real fly on the wall kind of sensibility that this film has, and it was one that just took me completely by surprise. This is one that I was excited to watch. Watch in the middle of the day, I believe on my second day of Film Fest, and I really, really loved it. It was one that has still stuck with me. It kind of treads some similar ground in terms of what it's kind of going for narratively, but I think thematically and just the way it goes about doing it is very exciting. It reminded me of Nickel Boys in the total opposite way, where Nickel Boys is like this really authentic story about this really authentic experience shown so close up with the POV of the camera, whereas this one's the opposite, where like the camera is you just sitting in the corner of this room watching it all unfold, watching characters kind of enter and exit this frame, and you're not able to engage with it. You're kind of kept at an arm's distance, but you are still in the room. It's almost like you have nowhere to go. You're trapped and you don't want to make a sound because you're worried you're going to interrupt what drama is going on ahead of you. It's almost like Drax in that scene of Avengers Infinity War or whatever, where he's eating the chips. He's trying to be silent and invisible because you don't want to disrupt what's going on, because it's very awkward if you do. That's the kind of feeling this movie gives you in a really interesting way, where the camera, by not being engaging at all, is even more engaging than if it were moving. And I think that's just so cool. Documentaries are a huge highlight of every Sundance for me. This year, none of the documentaries hit my top 5, but I did want to bring up 2 that I really, really loved. Predators, which kind of talks about the rise and fall of To Catch a Predator, a show that I didn't watch, but I've heard a lot about. And it really just goes into the moral dilemma of it. The idea that you are doing something good in terms of getting these people who are clearly monsters, giving them the consequences for what they deserve, for being these really terrible people and these monsters, as I just said. But also the flip side of that being that you are trying to do so in an engaging manner that's entertaining as TV. And I think that's a really interesting kind of moral dilemma. I think a lot of those true crime films or TV shows, they really have to reckon with is this idea of entertainment versus, reality, and the idea that are you yourself becoming a villain by doing this and by exploiting this for your own benefit. And it really has something interesting to say about TV studios and what they see as entertainment, and the fact that they play with literal people's lives because of it. And what I like about this documentary is it doesn't excuse any of the behavior of these criminals, of these people who did very awful, terrible things. If you are a parent, especially, or if you have young siblings, or if you work as like a teacher or with kids, this is a very harrowing, very haunting, very terrifying documentary because of that. But also, you can understand that yes, what they're doing is terrible, but are you also terrible for kind of showcasing it and trying to make a TV show and get ratings and views and clicks and notoriety and fame because you're the one putting it out there for everyone to see, as almost this like kind of clown show, if you will. So I thought it was a really really interesting moral dilemma. And then the other documentary, this one actually won the Audience Award for documentaries for US. It is André is an Idiot. Now the US documentary audience winners have been my favorite films in like the last few festivals. Daughters was my favorite film last year here. 2 years ago, it was Beyond Utopia. André is an Idiot didn't crack my top 5 this year, but I can see why audiences were gelling with it so much. I mean, this is a story about a guy who's quite literally documenting his last few years on Earth after he turns out he gets a colonoscopy and finds out he has colon cancer. And it's really, really interesting because, yes, we've seen other documentaries about people, dying and kind of capturing the end of their life in a really nuanced way. But André is an Idiot kind of takes the opposite approach and does it in a very kind of punk rock way, that's very flashy and colorful and offbeat and quirky and eccentric, just like André himself. And, it has this really interesting edge to it that I think is really going to attract a lot of people and really engage a lot of people. At its core, it's really just a colonoscopy PSA. It's really basically telling you get your colonoscopies because you don't want to be stupid like this André guy and go for so long without one and then realize it's too late. I do think of Dick Johnson is Dead, documentary from a few years ago is actually my favorite documentary of 2020, which maybe dealt with a similar manner in a very authentic, original, inspired, and also touching way. And I think André is an Idiot does all those things as well. It's just something I've already seen before in another documentary I love a lot. But it is very different in terms of tone, which is why I think it actually makes a really good double feature with Dick Johnson is Dead. So I did like André is an Idiot, even though it didn't crack my top 5. But why don't we get to the top 5? I've already talked for a half hour. Let's get into this top 5, starting with number 5, my 5th favorite film slash project slash TV show, because there might be one of my top 5, is Sukkwan Island. This is a film by Vladimir de Fontenay. This stars Swan Arlaud, who you might recognize from Anatomy of a Fall, which was a Best Picture player a few years ago. It also stars Woody Norman, who is one of my favorite up-and-coming actors. It's actually quite jarring to hear his voice drop already. He was so great in Come On with the Mike Mills film with Joaquin Phoenix. He was also great in the film Cobweb. But here he's actually becoming like a teenager, so it's just really cool to watch his career evolve. But it really follows this father and son. They go on this like bonding trip to this kind of remote, secluded island deep in like Norway, in the fjords of Norway. And it starts off as this kind of like slightly awkward, but also kind of sentimental bonding experience between father and son. But then as they stay there longer and longer, it becomes like this cabin fever thriller, akin to something like The Lighthouse or The Hateful Eight, where like these people are in this very cold environment and they start to like kind of eat away at one another. Their relationship starts to strain, and then it becomes a quite literal survival thriller because they are in this icy area. There is a bear that apparently raids through their campsite, their cabin, and how they have to navigate not just their tumultuous relationship, but the elements around them. And then it becomes something like Society of the Snow or The Revenant, So I really liked the progression of events in this film, the progression of the drama. You think it's one thing, and then it kind of transitions and becomes something else by the end. And what I loved about it is that you think you have it all figured out. You are understanding what point of view you're seeing the film from because of something that happens very early on, the kind of framing device. But then at the end of the film, you're like, wait a sec, if that's the framing device, then how is this possible? And then they kind of twist it again at the end and kind of retextualize everything that happened right before. And I really, really like that. I like how something can like be put into completely different context with every single twist. It's the reason I love M. Night Shyamalan when he really nails his twists. This is a film that I think fully earns its twist. It really plays with the idea of the unreliable narrator in such a fascinating way. And this is actually a real life story. The actual book that was written, I will not spoil what the book is because I think the book actually spoils a lot of what the movie is. And I think I will always advocate to reading the book first, but this is one of those films that if you can just avoid what the book is about, I think it's going to make an incredible experience for you, because this experience for me was just so engaging and shocking and perplexing and surprising in ways I never expected. I thought this would just be like a very run of the mill survival thriller, but the ways it kind of plays with the narrative in the very final moments is just so cool. It's one of those films that like I liked, and then the final scene happened, and I loved it. So that's all I'll say, because I really don't want to give more away about its story, because it does involve a lot of spoilers that if you are not tapped into is going to make it so rewarding for you. So I'm going to go read that book, but don't read the book before you see it. If you've never read the book, if you've never heard of the book, don't read it, because I think it's going to be a really special experience for you when you do. My number four film, this is one I really, really loved as well. We're getting into like the love, love, love territory. Like all these films I'm about to talk about and TV shows, I really loved. And that is Eva Victor's Sorry Baby. This is a film that actually I heard a lot of buzz about from the in-person Sundance. And I was like, you know what? I got to jump on it. I got to get a ticket for it. And I got a ticket online. And I was just captivated immediately. I think Eva themselves is just such an engaging comedian. They bring a real honesty and humanity to their work, and a real sadness at times. But also, because they're a comedian, they find the right way to pepper in jokes where the humor is not forced, but it is a little odd. It's a little uncomfortable, but that's a relatable thing, trying to find the humor in life's most sorrowful, tragic moments. And I think that's what this film does so well. It is quite literally the best tonal blend of comedy and drama that I've seen since maybe a few years ago at the festival with Cooper Rafe's Cha Cha Real Smooth, because, he's another filmmaker that I feel like can blend drama and comedy so well, to where the comedy, it feels random at times, but it feels right for who these characters are. And Sorry Baby is the same thing. I'm not going to really tell you what Sorry Baby is about, because it's another thing that I think when you're watching the film, it's really great to experience in the moment. It's very harrowing what happens to this person, but you start to see how this person kind of navigates their life. You check in with this character every single year for 5 years, and you start to see how their life changes, but also how that kind of deep emotional trauma also seeps its way into everything. And then I think just the way the humor is written, as I said, is so clever. There were moments where I was crying. There was moments that I was touched and happy and laughing. And I think that's really Ava Victor's biggest strength, is the ability to just teeter that line between tones so effortlessly. And I really just love the structure of it. I love that it was kind of jumping through time, but because we kind of got the incident early on, we could kind of see it kind of find its way into the subtext of everything else in the film. And then the final moments, it just makes it that much more worthwhile when you see this full circle moment kind of come to fruition. I think the cast is great. Ava themselves is just insanely good. I mean, not only are they a great director and writer, but they are also just terrific. I mean, there's a scene where the character Agnes describes to her friend what she just went through, the trauma she just went to, and it's just this one still shot of her face, and Ava Victor in their acting just gives a just heart-wrenching performance. But again, peppers a few jokes in there in just such a nonchalant way, which is again the beauty of this film. The fact that they can find some humor in everything, not making light of any situations, but just the natural way that we as humans kind of navigate these uncomfortable things around us is through humor and through sarcasm, through wit. And I just think again, one of the most confident, most lovely debuts I've seen at Sundance, and bar none. I'm just really excited to see this film just got picked up by A24. I'm excited for other people to see it and get a hold of it and love it just as much as I did. So that is my number four. My number three is a little bit more on the full-blown sorrow train. There's really not a lot of lightness to it. It's not an easy watch. It is Omaha, which is directed by Cole Webley. This is a film that stars John Magaro as a father who takes his kids cross-country en route to Omaha, to Nebraska. Why he's going to Nebraska, you do find out, but I would be a terrible person for spoiling it for you, because I think the beauty of this film is the fact that you don't necessarily know what's going on. You can kind of understand what's going on, why they have to leave where they're at, but you don't necessarily know why Nebraska. Why are they going to Nebraska? And as the film goes on, you can kind of start to come to terms with what is going on. And even though you figured it out, when it finally happens, you're in such denial that you can't accept that this is the reality of what is happening to this family, but you have to. It's one of the most devastating experiences I've seen. I watched this with my parents. I was like, yeah, I heard this one's really good. Let's sit down and watch it. And by the end, we were all like, whew, that was a killer. It is one of those films that is going to depress you. And I think it's one of those films that kind of like Mad Bills to Pay, the film I talked about earlier, the main character does some things in the film that you are going to disagree with, that you are going to think is deplorable, but also you're gonna understand because the movie has such a good empathy towards its characters, and the director and writer have such a good empathy, and the characters themselves, I mean, just the way they interact with one another. I mean, you buy that this is a real family. Yes, I know John Magaro is an actor. Yes, I've seen him in other things, but the child performances from Wyatt Sullis and especially Molly Bell Wright, it really brings it all together. It really shows this really beautiful, harmonious family dynamic, only for the impending doom and sorrow to befall them in the final act. It just really is a tough watch, but it's also gorgeously shot. They really make good use of the kind of countryside atmosphere in a similar way that Nomadland did. There's a lot of natural lighting, a lot of beautiful wide shots in this thing, and then I really liked the kind of dynamic cinematography within the car itself. There's a lot of interesting close-ups, and the close-ups that you wouldn't expect to see in certain moments, like one character's talking, but it's a close-up on the dog, and what does that mean? And you kind of read into it a little too far, but then are you reading into it? It can't be that bad. Oh, it's that bad. It's one of those films though that I think really rewards the audience intelligence and really, feels like a experience that is unlike many others that I've seen. So I really do love Omaha, and I do think it's going to be one of those films that is most talked about. I think of any film out of Sundance, this one has the most potential at like Oscar stuff. I don't want to look that far ahead, obviously, but I think there is a real chance, especially John Magaro, if he can hang on. This is his best performance by a mile, and it just really brings an empathy and authenticity to a specific time period. It also takes place right at the start of the recession in 2008. So, there's a relatability there for a lot of people who went through it and suffered through it as well. That is going to just be so heart wrenching. And I'm sorry for you in advance when you have to watch this. Plainclothes is my number two. Plainclothes is directed by Carmen Emmy in another very confident directorial debut. This stars Tom Blythe from the Hunger Games, Songbirds, and Snakes movie. He was terrific in that. He is even better in this. This is probably my favorite performance of Sundance in 2025. Scratch that. My number one has another performance, but this one for films, this is the best film performance I saw at Sundance 2025. This follows a guy who is an undercover cop trying to bust gay men in the 90s in restrooms. A lot of gay men would go to restrooms to perform sexual activity, and the cops were trying to snipe them out and attack them and lock them up because back then it was wrong to be gay, especially in the midst of AIDS. It's a really terrible time to live in, a very harrowing time. I couldn't imagine living through that. Just with so many friends of mine that are gay. Like I just can't fathom a world where that would be criminalized. But that is what is so angering about this film. The fact that this man who has to go in and accomplish these acts of busting people for homosexual activity is himself coming out and kind of tackling his own sexuality and coming to terms with his own sexuality. And I thought that just aided in so much great tension and suspense and thrills. It didn't exploit homosexuality. It didn't try to make homosexuality this like vile, kind of manipulative thing either. It was really honest and it had some very tender displays of homosexual romance, which I really really appreciated. But it is also a thriller at the end of the day. You don't want him to get caught by his friends, but at the same time you want him to live freely as his own self, and you want him to be this free out man and be happy and comfortable with his sexuality. And then when you meet his partner in the film that he ends up romancing, you start to see his side of the story too, and the hardships he has to face as a man based on his profession that he has to kind of leave, kind of conceal within himself. And it just makes for such a really, really amazing romance and drama, but also just such a great thriller because throughout you're just on edge the entire time, worried that this guy is going to just spin himself into so many different webs that he can't get out of. And the final scene of this movie is just so chaotic and so perfect. It reminded me of something you'd see out of like The Bear, just this real great orchestrated, beautiful chaos that leads to something that is just so impactful. One of the most impactful final lines and final shots and final sequences of any movie. So I'm very excited for people to see this one. This one had just enough entertainment value, but also so much substance below the surface and what it's trying to say thematically. And what I also really loved is just the way it's shot, because it's kind of depicting this time of the 90s, and because it's about this cop who's kind of undercover trying to capture and almost kind of be surveillant of certain things. It's all shot with this like camcorder. A lot of sequences, the editing style is very choppy, but it's supposed to kind of show this inner monologue in his head, this inner turmoil, where the cinematography and the editing, the choppiness and the intensity and the sounds. I mean, the sound in this thing, there's a lot of that buzz and hum that you get from like those old like 90s camcorders when you replay those home videos. There's a lot of that in it. And I think it's not only to emphasize the style, but also be a great way to get inside this character's head. So I just think between style, themes, acting, performance, drama, tension, romance. It had it all. It was my favorite film I saw at Sundance 2025. But what is my favorite thing I saw? I keep dancing around this. I'm not talking about films here because my favorite thing I saw at Sundance was an 8-episode series from my man Cooper Raiff, who is a Sundance darling for me. I discovered his work, Cha Cha Real Smooth, a few years ago. It changed my life. I got on here and I started crying to you all. If you go back to find that review, God bless. You can quite literally find me like crying over this movie and how much it spoke to me, because Cooper Raiff is 1 year older than me, so he's kind of pulling from a very similar experience as me, and he just created what I believe will maybe be known as his like magnum opus, if you will, and that is Hal and Harper. This is an 8-episode series. It hasn't been picked up at the time of recording this. I hope it gets picked up because I hope a lot of people see it. I hope it gets a lot of Emmy nominations. But what it is, it's basically a similar idea of like trying to navigate this like end of college, early adulthood phase of your life. You're not sure what you want your career to be. You're kind of struggling and butting heads with your family a little bit. There's a lot of change in the air. But the added bonus to Hal and Harper, because it's an 8-episode series, is that it's not all confined to Cooper Raiff's character's perspective. Instead, it's about these two siblings. It's about Hal, who is played by Cooper Raiff, but also Harper, who's played by Lily Reinhart. And when I said earlier that Tom Blythe had my favorite performance in film at Sundance, it's because Lily Reinhart has my favorite performance at Sundance. In fact, this is the best performance I've seen at Sundance since Daniel Kaluuya in Judas and the Black Messiah. Her performance in this show, is undeniable. It is fantastic. I mean, she's someone I've always admired. I obviously loved her in Hustlers. I thought, the scenes I've seen her in of Riverdale, I've always found that she's one of the more talented cast members in that show. But this is just a whole nother level. This is her real coming out party as like a true, undeniable, dramatic actress. And every single scene she was in, even the ones where she's not talking, because she's kind of this like moral, kind of grounded, quiet center of this family. She's the one who kind of does a lot of the observing going on around her. Something I didn't even speak about when I was talking about Omaha was the idea that, a lot of it is seen through the child's perspective, kind of trying to come to terms with these things about her father that she can't quite piece together. In a similar way of like After Sun, the series also delves into similar themes. The idea that Harper is the one who's a little bit more aware of what is going on with her family. She's able to kind of have that intellect and that observation in trying to understand her family. And then you have Hal, on the other hand, who's a little bit more free. He's a little bit more rambunctious. He's a little bit more, a kid. He didn't have to grow up too fast because his sister was kind of the one anchoring the family. And with that, you also have the father, played by Mark Ruffalo, who also needs to get an Emmy for this. He is so good in this. This is my favorite performance of Ruffalo's in God knows how long. I love Mark Ruffalo, but this is maybe his best performance ever. He's the father of Hal and Harper. And, this whole family dynamic, you start to discover what the backstory to this family is, what they've gone through, and how that went about, not just what happened, but how it happened. And I really love how this plays with time in a very interesting way. It kind of chronicles what's going on right now with Hal and Harper and the change in their lives and the change in their father's life and the change in his girlfriend's life as well. His girlfriend, played by Betty Gilpin, is also fantastic in this. She's pregnant. So it's also them navigating that. But also you start to see these flashbacks to like 2005 when Hal and Harper were kids. And what Cooper Raiff does really, really magnificently in the series is that he and Lily Reinhart quite literally play the childhood versions of themselves. So when they're at school with all the little kids, it's like all the little kids, and then it's Cooper Raiff with a backpack, almost like Billy Madison in a way. And at first, on paper, you'd probably look at this and be like, that looks stupid. That's such a stupid idea. That's so like, that just seems artsy for the sake of doing something different. But it really makes sense with what the series is trying to tackle in terms of the idea of a tragedy hitting a family and the kids pretty much being forced to grow up too fast because the father can't necessarily handle his own emotions, let alone take care of a whole family. And I think that is something that is so beautiful and so brilliant. And like Eva Victor in Sorry Baby, Cooper Raiff is just able to balance tone in such a unique way where these are quite literal adults playing kids. And they even kind of do things that are very adult-like. I mean, the whole joke is that they grew up too fast. So like Lily Reinhart's smoking a cigarette and she's supposed to be like 8 years old. And again, these are very, very interesting things because one moment you could be crying because like Lily Reinhart's performance is getting to your soul in such a profound way, and then you're cracking up the next minute, but it all makes sense. It doesn't feel tonally jarring. And I think that's the thing with Cooper Raiff's work, is that he's able to find this real consistency between tones and this real great blend. And I really loved it throughout the series. I was never bored. I watched this. This was the last thing I watched at Sundance. I saved it for last because I knew this was going to be an important one, because Cha Cha Real Smooth really spoke to me. It was a movie that hit me at a certain point when I needed that movie, when I needed that life reassurance and that affirmation. And yes, some people may say say Cooper Rave is a little self-indulgent because he casts himself as the lead, but I think with this series especially, it shows that he is such a giving director and writer as well, because Hal is not really the focus of the series. I mean, he's a big part of it, but it really is mostly centered around Harper and her father, because they're the ones who are really grappling with grief in the most heart-wrenching way. They have the real drama, the real meat of it. And Hal has his moments of drama as well, but Hal is almost meant to be kind of this comedic kind of balance to Harper's more serious plot. But then when Cooper Rave is able to dig deeper into the emotional stuff, it really hits, especially in the last few episodes. But back to my original thought, like, I love how Cooper Rave is so giving because he gives a lot of these big moments to Lily Reinhart, to Mark Ruffalo. It doesn't feel like a Cooper Rave vanity project. I didn't think Cha Cha Real Smooth did either. I thought he did a really great job in representing autism in that film in a really healthy way, also letting Dakota Johnson shine. But a lot of people said it was a little bit of a vanity project, but I think Hal Harper is the opposite, where he's really just kind of sitting back in a way. He's still present, but he's letting other actors really shine and really take the spotlight from him. And I thought that was really, really impactful, really, really moving to see just his evolution as a filmmaker, as a TV maker, I guess, as well. And, you know, Cha Cha Real Smooth has that really sentimental bond with me, but I think this series is really a step up in evolution, not just in his writing, in his concept, you know, the idea of these kids being played by adults and this whole idea of growing up too fast and this family navigating grief in a really interesting way with all these linear timelines, but the style of it as well. I mean, the editing between sequences, the use of needle drops and soundtracks, and the authenticity of the time. I mean, I grew up at the same time Cooper Raiff did, so I'm able to see the details of the production design, the costumes, the pop culture references. You know, I loved the pop culture references. There's actually a reference made in episode 1 where a character talks about moving to Dallas and being excited because they get to watch Doncic play with the Mavericks, and that is the funniest thing because literally the day I was watching it, Doncic got traded to the Lakers. So I don't know, there's just such great references throughout. And again, a movie or TV show isn't good because of the references, but as someone who lived through this time, to see that specificity of a certain time period and see it so authentically portrayed in Cooper Rave's work, and just the fact that Cooper Rave's characters as well go through similar experiences that I did, just kind of struggling and navigating through this weird coming of age where you kind of went through a pandemic. And this doesn't involve the pandemic directly, but like the fact that I graduated during the pandemic and I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life as a performer. And, you know, Cooper Rave's characters are always at a crisis of like, what do they want to do with their life? There's always a scene in every Cooper Rave movie or project where Cooper Rave goes to a job interview, totally F's it up, and then his parents laugh at him in the very next scene. Like, that's something you see consistently because that's the experience that he has, that I have, that I think a lot of people of the similar generation have. So I just love this one top to bottom. Every single episode was great. The performances throughout were great. And this reminded me of This Is Us, not just because it's a family drama told through different timelines, kids and adults and all that, but also because every single bit character feels like they could have their own series. Like, Harper's girlfriend, she has her own backstory. You start to fall in love with her, even though she's only in a few episodes. Cooper Raiff, his character Hal, his kind of one night stand. You want to know a lot about her. She's played by Havana Rose Leo, who I loved in Bottoms. She's a really exciting performer to watch emerge these past few years. But, every single character, even Betty Gilpin's character, they all have their little pockets and little moments to shine, that you could see this kind of branching out and becoming this big This Is Us thing where we chronicle years and years and years with this family. But I also think it's really nice where it ends. I think it ends in a really fitting spot for what this whole narrative has been building to. I've been talking so much about this show because I'm obsessed with it. I think when it kind of reaches the air and when people kind of get to see it, I'm going to kind of go even deeper in depth and cover episode by episode what I love about it, because it really is one of those series that just spoke to me in so many ways, in a similar way that Cha Cha Real Smooth did, but in such a bigger way because of all these extra added layers. I think when I watch this as a parent, I'm going to be able to see things through a different lens completely there as well. Cha Cha Real Smooth dealt with the parenting a lot as well, but it was mostly confined to Cooper Rave's experience, whereas this one, it really is about this multi-generational experience and how dramatic and traumatic things kind of channel their way through different generations. And sometimes, yes, they are your parents. You're supposed to take care of the kids, but sometimes the kids have to take care of you as well. And I love when this whole like illusion of the adults playing kids, when it is dropped and when it is used and when it isn't, it's really impactful. I just think this is a perfect series. I think there's nothing I could complain about it. The only thing I could complain about is maybe could have had an extra 2 episodes. Like, I really just loved it that much. I really have nothing to complain about. And I think that's the best thing about his work in general, is that it's just so perfect in speaking to me directly that I just can't take issue with it. Because taking issue with it would be taking issue with my own way of life and my own sensibilities and my own state of being in a way. So Hal Harper, best thing I watched at Sundance. Plainclothes, my favorite film I watched at Sundance. But man, I mean, I almost talked an hour. I wanted this video to be 30 minutes long, but hey, I am so glad that Sundance was as beautiful and amazing as it was. And yes, people tried to ruin it with Twinless, and people tried to, take advantage of this beautiful gift that they have. And if we don't have a virtual Sundance next year, I won't be surprised. But if this is the last Sundance I get to attend virtually, hopefully someday I'll get to attend in person. But if this is it for a while, I'm glad I ended on such a strong series and such a strong slate of movies. I mean, Plainclothes, Omaha, Sorry Babies, Sukkwan Island, Hal Harper, those five are going to be like at the top of my year-end lists, I'm sure. Even Mad Bills to Pay, which didn't quite make the top five. Even these international films like Version of Quarry Lake and Things You Killed, these movies that I think are going to grow with estimation over time, and these documentaries as well. I just really, really loved this slate of Sundance movies. And there's so much stuff that I didn't even see. So if you saw stuff, let me know down below. What did you see? What did you love? What were your favorite things to see at Sundance? And are you excited for any of these movies or shows if you haven't heard of them, haven't seen them? Did I do a good enough job enticing you to see them? But otherwise, that's it for me. I talked long enough. Thank you guys so much for joining my Best of the Fest. It's one of my favorite videos to make this year, and it really kind of sets the groundwork for the year to come. So thank you so much. A lot of other stuff coming to the channel soon. My Oscars death race is going to kick off this weekend with my above the line category reviews, and then I'm going to go through each and every category as I can as I'm checking the films off the list, because I'm going to be watching every single Oscar nominee this year, all 50. I believe it's 50, or maybe it's 30. I think I overshot it. I think it's 30, but either way, I'm watching all of them. I'm very excited for them. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Subscribe, like, stick around for more. Promise a lot of great things coming in the new year. Thank you so much, and see you next time.